This is Larry Zbyszko, wrestling's living legend, and you're listening to WGD Weekly with Steve and The Scum.
All right, folks, thanks so much for joining us. WGD Weekly with Steve and The Scum, very special edition of WGD Weekly PWI 500 edition. We're going to go over the PWI 500 with none other than Dan Murphy, the senior writer of Pro Wrestling Illustrated himself. So happy that he's here with us, Scum.
Steve, it's a pleasure to be back with you on this midweek special edition PWI 500 WGD Weekly show. Always a pleasure to be with you, my longtime tag team partner, and it's certainly going to be a pleasure to make it a six-man tonight when we tag in senior writer from Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Dan Murphy, and maybe get him on the hot seat and grill him about this recent edition, this year's edition of the PWI 500, maybe take a trip down memory lane with some of the old editions of the 500 and see what Dan has to say about how the whole thing comes together annually there at Pro Wrestling Illustrated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, you think about it's that time of the year where football starts and baseball's in the stretch down to the playoffs. The playoffs are getting heated up. We got basketball right around the corner. But for a true wrestling fan, you know, this time of the year is dedicated to one thing and one thing only, and that is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated 500. Always a good amount of heated debate. I know, Scum, just getting ready for the show, you and I were bickering back and forth a little bit.
That's usually how things play out.
We're going to get right down to it, folks. This is a special edition of WGD Weekly. We got our weekly show here in between. This is going to broadcast somewhere in between our Sunday programming. So let's get right down to business. We got Dan Murphy, senior writer of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, on the line with us now. Dan, how's it going today, man?
Hey, it's not too bad. I'm still a little bit upset. My Buffalo Bills lost to the New England Patriots in the last quarter of the game today, but I'll get over it eventually, but other than that, everything's going well.
You know, I'm in the same boat. My Steelers lost too, so football's not getting off to a good start, but we'll make up for it with a good discussion about the PWI 500. Now, let's get right down to business here. We're spending the majority of the show discussing the PWI 500, which hits the newsstands recently for this year's edition. But first, some of our listeners who may not be so familiar with PWI, Dan, give us a little background on the publication and give us a little backstory on how and when you got involved with the magazine and exactly what your job with them entails.
Oh, actually, that's great. Pro Wrestling Illustrated as a magazine started in 1979. We did have some other publications under the same publisher prior to that. But these days, Pro Wrestling Illustrated is kind of the cornerstone of Kappa Publishing in terms of the pro wrestling magazines. So PWI has been around for over 30 years, almost 35 years now. I started up around 1997. I don't know, a lot of your listeners, a lot of you guys, a lot of wrestlers that I bump into were big fans of the wrestling magazines in the 80s and into the 90s. And I came on right during the kind of Attitude Era beginning and really kind of changing what we were doing with the magazines from being a lot more storyline driven to being kind of a mix of storyline and fact and really kind of trying to keep pace with the internet and new journalism and everything else that was coming out at the time as the wrestling game really kind of began to change. But over the past 6 or 7 years, I've taken a very active role with the PWI 500 and the PWI Female 50. And really kind of work with Stu Sachs, the publisher, and a couple of the other writers to kind of spearhead that and put it all together.
That is some fantastic stuff. Now, I'm told here that you're the international correspondent. Now, we have an intercontinental correspondent here. Maybe he could take a couple of pointers from me. He's located over in New Zealand, so I think it's like 4 o'clock in the morning, Tuesday afternoon over there right now. So hopefully when he gets a chance to listen to this. But I promise you, we're going to get to the list here real quick. But next up, I wanted to touch on your favorite stuff when it comes to the international wrestling scene. As you know, there's always several names from Japan, Mexico, and other places around the globe that our listeners may not be so familiar with near the top of each year's list. And I'll tell you, Dan, I'm at the top of the list of fans that would love to know about those guys because I'm really kind of ignorant when it comes to anything past the American product simply because, you know, the whole English language thing. So explain, if you would, to our fans the differences that may be in the style, the different organizations, say, from Japan or Mexico, as far as the in-ring working style and just an overall product. And how would you say these differences at all affect the selection process for the PWI 500?
Well, the 500 began, when it did begin, there was a little bit of speculation as to whether or not there were 500 wrestlers who really deserved to be ranked. And this was back in 1991 when we first did it. And clearly today there are well more than 500 deserving wrestlers. I mean, there are probably about maybe 1,800, 1,900 wrestlers that we looked at and considered for spots. I really kind of watched a lot of the matches and looked at a lot of results and everything to begin to look. You're not just looking at the United States. You're looking at Canada and Mexico and Japan and throughout all of Europe. You're looking at Australia, New Zealand, a lot of other promotions where pro wrestling has taken off. You'll find a lot of differences between the different countries. The biggest ones really being with the U.S. style, the Japanese pro wrestling style, and out in Mexico with the Lucha Libre style. Obviously, European and the British have their kind of catch-as-catch-can style as well. There's a lot of similarities, a little bit of differences, but I think the best way to kind of look at the 500 is if you were to look at the top 500 actors in the world. And actors, I mean, an actor does what the actor is meant to do. It calls for what the script relies on. Maybe you're an action actor, you do action movies, and maybe you do drama, maybe you do comedies. You're working with whatever the confines of the job calls for. But if you're looking at the top 500 actors worldwide, you get this weird mix of, maybe Bollywood actors who do musicals, maybe U.S. films and drama and stage and everything else. And I think the 500 kind of does that as well. It looks cross-disciplinary into all these different styles, into all these different companies, and who are the ones who are really the best at the game in the company where they are and where they're based and are really kind of driving things forward and kind of grading them all on this kind of sliding scale based on their accomplishments, their ring ability, and what they've succeeded in doing in their home promotion. So it's kind of a difficult metric to really kind of break down. But in the main thing, you look at someone like John Cena in WWE, you look at somebody in New Japan or All Japan, they're all asked to do slightly different things, but we look at who does it the best, and that's who we look at for our top spots.
Well, considering all of that, who is your personal favorite, or what region of the world is your personal favorite to kind of get into and do some heavy investigating and get those names into the PWI 500?
For me, really, and this is kind of a personal bias, I kind of like heavyweights. It's the same with wrestling and boxing. I like heavyweights who have knockout power. Heavyweights are really successful in the United States. I love submission grappling. I'm a wrestling purist. But I think the guys who are heavyweights who have submission abilities are really thriving in the U.S., whereas in Japan, for the most part, you're looking at guys who are very, very talented, but they're closer to the cruiserweight model than traditional, U.S.-based pro wrestlers. You don't have the 300-pound monsters anymore. So I kind of like it all. I like Japan a lot. I like the U.S. style. I'm not as much of a fan as the Lucha Libre style as some of the others, but I try to keep an open mind and just see what's out there.
Fantastic. And you and I kind of agree on that with the heavyweight, the big guy. I've always kind of been a fan of them on a personal level. I know the Scum can vouch for me there. And the reason that has always been the believability factor of a bigger guy in the ring, that big boot. It's believable that he can knock you off your feet. And like you said, add in a big guy with the ability to move around the ring and add the submission style, something new that you see with the crossover of a lot of the guys from mixed martial arts. That's some fantastic stuff. It's very entertaining to watch. So certainly very interesting.
Yeah, it's like Gorilla Monsoon. Gorilla Monsoon used to always say, a good big man will always beat a good little man. And, there's something to that. What's been a big trend in wrestling over the past 10 years or so has been a lot of lighter guys getting a lot more focus, Chris Sabin and TNA, for example. But I think that if you can find a guy who's 260 or so, who's a well-rounded wrestler, can work a variety of different styles, I think that's the guy that you really want to kind of bank on.
No doubt. No, folks, we're here with Dan Murphy, senior writer from Pro Wrestling Illustrated, talking all things PWI 500. Now, we know going in up to the PWI 500 that always remained in a kayfabe format, in a storyline format. When reporting the action, at least to some degree, if I'm not mistaken there, that is always part that plays in the decision-making process as well. So when ranking the annual 500, please explain exactly what criteria is considered by the panelists and yourself when coming up with the final list each year before it hits that newsstands.
Yeah, the one thing to really remember is that it's based on accomplishments within the past 12 months. So the 12-month period of time that we look at, it's the previous 12 months. So it's not what's happened necessarily before that or after that. We're really looking at that 12-month span. So we had a lot of people who were really upset because Daniel Bryan didn't get a higher ranking than what he got, but really he had a much better run after the June 30th cutoff than we looked at during our evaluation period. So the first thing, we look at a 12-month period of time and really give that the main precedence. We look at your accomplishments, championships won, quality of opposition, overall ring ability, your success in your basic promotion, your overall activity, and your work rate. Those are kind of the main things that we look at. So you really kind of, again, you compare things, a variety of different criteria, but it's how long you've been able to stay at the top within that 12-month span.
That's very interesting. And you know, I guess for chronology reasons, I should have probably asked this next question first, but if you could give us an idea as to, and I know this is maybe predates you just by a couple of years here, Dan, but tell us a little bit about how the PWI 500 actually came to be in the early 90s.
Yeah, it basically, it was just a matter of looking at the proliferation of independents at the time. There were a lot of wrestlers who were out of Jim Crockett Promotions, who were out of the WWF, who had wrestled in those. You had Memphis, you had some of the other territories that were still in existence at the time. And basically, this one, Bill Apter was still with the magazine, and Stu Sachs, and some of the others who were involved with that, Craig Peters at the time, they decided to do a ranking and see if we could do, because nobody was doing that at the time. Again, this predates the internet. This is 1991. It's before there were message groups and everything else. And we wanted to see if we could take a really objective look at who are the top 500 in the world. And you're looking at guys who could be, you know, okay, tag team guys and comedy guys and serious main event guys and preliminary guys. And let's really see if we can rank these guys and see what we can come up with. And it was a huge seller. It got a lot of controversy. It got a lot of discussion and conversation. And ever since that, it's become a annual institution with Pro Wrestling Illustrated.
That's fantastic. And, you know, again, myself and the Scum both being administrators on some sites across the internet, you know, you see a lot of top 10s, a lot of top 50s, and a lot of top 100s, but there's very few entities out there that dare to take the step into a 500. So that's something pretty incredible. And I know doing just some small amount of writing and doing some lighter humor top 10s and stuff, it becomes a debate even with 10 performers. So I can only imagine with 500 in a group full of rabid wrestling fans that, you know, work in the wrestling industry, journalism part for a living. So before I send it over to the Scum, though, I got to ask, given the feedback that you guys have already given us, or that you've already given us, how difficult is it to come up with a final decision with several different opinions having to weigh in on each year's list? And is there any year in particular that you personally recall that there was, you know, a really, really difficult choice, or for that matter, a real easy selection process in deciding your number one for the 500?
The number one, I think the year that was probably toughest for number one was 2 years ago. And that was the year that we had The Miz as number one. And what we do is, just a little bit of background of what we've done, is we had about 8 of us, 8 writers of the magazine, meet up at the office in Philadelphia and sit down and begin a ranking process. And we kind of, as a committee, rank for an afternoon, for a day. So maybe we'll get up to 80 to 100, depending on how well we're going and how the debate goes, because we literally debate every single number. You know, number 7, well, let's say that's number 7, you know, maybe this guy should be number 9, and it's not an easy thing. It's not just a crapshoot kind of thing, and let's alternate, hey, one TNA guy, one WWE guy, one Ring of Honor guy, and go back to the top. We really kind of put a lot of discussion and evaluation into it. We look at won-loss records. We look at the push over the past year. We look at titles and the length of title reigns and the quality of opposition, like I mentioned. So we really kind of agonize over that. We get that first preliminary group, maybe the first top 75, top 80 or so. And then what I've done over the past several years is I've kind of gone and worked on the rest. And I put together a draft 500 list that I submit to Stu Sachs and some of the other writers and say, okay, let's get feedback. And then we get some conversation going. We look who have we overlooked? Who might be in there who doesn't deserve to be in there? And really kind of begin to pick apart the list and begin to kind of edit it and kind of go from there. So that's kind of the selection process. Now, the year that we had The Miz as number 1, it was tough because all of us thought, well, clearly The Miz is not the best wrestler in the world. He's not the most technically sound. He's not the most the strongest, the best, whatever the case may be. But he had the most success, and the amount of championships he won at WrestleMania, the main event of WrestleMania, disputed as it was with The Rock kind of interfering on John Cena's behalf. But he won, and his accomplishments couldn't be diminished. And that year, we decided, this guy's done more in the 12-month span than anybody else has. And it kind of, we hated to do it, but we stood by it. Some years, like this year, it was a little bit easier. But, yeah, every year is a little bit different, and we look at all those intangibles as well as kind of in-ring prowess.
Dan, thanks for being with us here. If you don't mind, now I'm going to get a little more specific as to this year's most recent 500 list and with some of the performers and their ranking. And maybe, let's say, to get back to the old Inside Wrestling, one of the sister publications, maybe put you on the hot seat here, if that's all right.
Nice. Well done.
All right. Yeah, well, hey, I had a subscription from about 85 to 91 or so in my younger days to the magazine, so I'm very familiar. Like I said, it's a thrill for both myself and Steve to have Pro Wrestling Illustrated on board as a friend at WGD Weekly in any way, so we appreciate it. And I'm going to start right in with, obviously, every year, everybody's a critic across the internet, the fans and everything, so I'll start with the obvious right up top. Now, personally, I don't have any problem whatsoever, and I agree with John Cena as number 1. I know he takes a lot of flack, let's say, maybe from some of the fans, what they call the smart fans, I guess. What I'm going to ask you about, though, first is one that some people might not like because he's one of their favorites there. Number 2 is CM Punk. Given what you were just saying, and I was happy to hear you speak about the criteria, say, with The Miz and their accomplishments and everything, no argument that CM Punk's a great wrestler. I think he's one of the best performers out there and very well-rounded. I like his work a lot, but given the June to June time frame for CM Punk to be number 2, I know there were a lot of high-profile matches, but especially in the last 3 in that time frame, his most high-profile matches, he didn't win any of them. Lost to The Rock twice, and The Undertaker beat him at WrestleMania. So I just wanted to know, and again, I know this won't be popular with the internet fan for the most part, but how does CM Punk justify it at number 2?
Now, I love that question because I think that all of the feedback I've gotten is people saying, well, how come CM Punk isn't number 1? Because he had the title, he had the run, he had everything else. But again, like you said, if you look at the 12-month evaluation period, yeah, he fell into a little bit of a slump. Now, he got number 2 really because, number 1, the quality of opposition that he was facing. He was always still on top. He was still in a really prominent spot. He was positioned in a lot of cases as kind of the show stealer of WWE. And really he had a terrific first half of the year. He had the title. He finished up that kind of epic title reign, and he was still positioned at the top of the card. A lot of people really kind of considered his match against Undertaker to be one of the kind of co-main events of WrestleMania. So he lost that, but you really can't hold that against him. Everybody loses to the Undertaker at WrestleMania. It was enough to drop him down from that number 1 spot, but he still had an epic run in the first half of the year. He was still on top. He was still in the verge of contention, and he still had a lot of wins. He had big wins throughout the year against, the Fatal 4-Way against Sheamus and the Big Show and Randy Orton in March to earn the shot against The Undertaker. He was still very highly promoted. So he was kind of the number 2 guy in WWE, and I don't think that anybody really had a better year other than John Cena than CM Punk.
Again, I was just wondering, again, I know from what I've read and the different discussions I've seen, and CM Punk, especially with the internet fan, is very popular. Personally, looking at it was familiar with the criteria of the selection process, so to me, that jumped out at me is, and I, to take a phrase from Jesse the Body Ventura back in the day, the scum tries to tell it like it is. So I was just wondering, it might not be the most popular question, but I was wondering how Punk wound up too. So I appreciate you explaining that. Moving along, I'm going to go to a couple more WWE performers that kind of burst on the scene this year on the main stage that made some serious movement in the 500. And again, you'll see that's kind of a theme in the next few questions to get it up. Get it one that I have for you a little further down the line here. That would be Dean Ambrose at number 26 and Big E Langston at 33. Now, again, using that June to June time frame, Ambrose jumped 228 spots and Langston 232. Again, though, by June, if I'm not mistaken, I know the Shield burst on at Survivor Series and made quite a splash. Don't really remember Ambrose really doing much on his own or having too many matches. And Big E Langston, the same thing. I mean, I know he was in a high-profile spot with Ziggler and everything, but it's pretty high up there, especially considering now myself, I like WWE and I also like TNA. So, some of the guys more so that I'll get to here in a second with TNA, especially that were maybe not as high as I would have thought they would have been. How did Ambrose and Langston climb that many spots on the chart up to 26 and 33, given their limited schedule, even though they had the high-profile spots on TV and everything?
There's a couple things to think of, and one of the things, every year people kind of look at, especially Harry Burkett is one of our senior writers, a terrific writer, and he has an encyclopedic knowledge of wrestling. He's one of the best wrestling writers out there, and he doesn't really get the credit he should get. One of the things he writes about typically with his column in the PWI 500 is he does that. He looks at people who have made really big jumps or have fallen, and really tries to put them in a perspective of, wow, this is a great year. This person has exceeded and attained this or fallen back, and looks at what it means for their career. The thing that I would caution with that, and Harry does a great job with it, but I always kind of feel uneasy looking at those numbers because everyone's changing. It's not like, if you look at somebody who goes 200 and then goes up into a top 20, everyone is static and moving during that 12-month period of time. People get injured, they move out, they're out of WWE or TNA, they go to the Indies, they move. So it's not like the competition is staying in the same spot and you're piggybacking or jumping above, leapfrogging, I should say, all these other people. Everyone starts with a clean slate at the beginning of each new year. We look at everything that way. So that's one thing. The second thing with that is that you also have to look at what's going on with these guys in NXT or in the developmental system. Big E Langston was the NXT champion, and he was really dominating at that level. He had a bunch of wins. He was just a dominant force when he came in, and he was taking on some big names. Same with Dean Ambrose when he came in. He very quickly took the U.S. title. And again, there weren't a lot of people who had more success than him within that 12-month period of time. So again, if you're looking at the accomplishments within the evaluation period, you have to look not so much at where they were last year and where they are this year, but what they've done this year, and then kind of look at it from that perspective. So kind of movement from the previous year's ranking, it's interesting to look at, and you can pick out a lot and kind of note some trends here and there. But I think that the bigger thing is really just their accomplishments within a given period of time and who they're facing, what success they're having, and what titles they're winning. And gotcha. Again, remembering success and accomplishments that are happening in dark matches and in developmental, for example, with those two individuals.
Sure, and I realize that all plays into it. And again, I think that, especially Ambrose, I think the Shield, I'm a fan of. I think that they burst on with it, were given a chance and got the ball and run with it, and Big E as well. So I again, not arguing with you, just like I said, trying to call them like I see them here. And
absolutely,
these were some of the points that I was hoping to get at. And again, I realized as you were explaining to Steve earlier about the international wrestlers that you cover and how they wind up in there. You know, I would assume within each company, regardless of where they're at in the world, whether they're WWE, TNA, Ring of Honor, some of the more popular American wrestling organizations, you know, it doesn't really weigh in necessarily just because you're in WWE. You don't get a, you know, more of, you know, the quality of opponent, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Regardless of company, that doesn't really weigh that heavily, correct?
It can. I mean, put it this way. If you are a mid-carder in WWE or you're a mid-carder in Ring of Honor, most likely we're going to rank you higher if you're a mid-carder in WWE. Because WWE is, to be perfectly honest, it's what everyone aspires to. I mean, if you're making it in WWE, if you've got that job in WWE, you've accomplished something. If you are active and working, and that has to be taken under consideration. People there have brought you up to the big leagues and see something in you. That's not to say that every mid-carder in WWE is better than everyone in Ring of Honor, but I would guarantee you that everybody in Ring of Honor on the mid-card level would love to switch and be on the mid-card level in WWE. I mean, that's kind of the overarching goal. So that is something that is kind of taken into consideration a little bit, but again, it's just one of several factors that we look at.
Well, the reason I touch on it is that's kind of where I was going with a couple of the next questions. Now, would TNA fall in the same? Are you thinking the same way along the mid-carders with TNA? Because some of the mid-carders and upper mid-carders that I was going to touch on next are TNA guys that, you know, as compared to where some of the WWE guys were ranked. Now, TNA, I would think, certainly would have a little more clout than Ring of Honor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, TNA is the number 2 company right now. It's, you know, national television. They have a lot of great talent there. And, you know, everybody wants to be on TV. Everybody wants to get their name out there. So if you can get that spot, there's only a very few spots that are available. If you're earning that, then you're succeeding. You're doing really well. Again, it's not the only criteria, but it is something that we do take into consideration.
Sure. Well, that being said, I'll move along to the next. And the 4 people, 2 WWE performers, 2 TNA performers that I'm going to touch on here are 4 that I personally am a fan of all 4 of them. I know Steve is as well. He would agree with me here. But again, I'm just going to question on that. I would consider all these guys upper mid-card. The TNA guys I would actually consider the top of their card maybe. And that would be the TNA guys that I was going to touch on was Austin Aries at number 12 and Bobby Roode at 24, who personally I feel may be their best 2 performers, and debatable in the entire company. Again, like I said, Aries was 12. He ran with the World Championship for a while, made a big splash, you know, turned in the X Division title, won the title from Roode, and then, you know, they actually teamed up for a while. Roode sits at 24. Again, those are pretty high spots, but given their spot on the card there and what they accomplish, especially Aries to be at 12 and just the performer that he is, and who I was just comparing and contrasting in the same boat from WWE, number 18 was Antonio Cesaro, who I'm a fan of his work. I like him a lot, but to be quite honest with you, he hardly ever wins. Never really won throughout that time period. I mean, yeah, he had the U.S. title, but I mean, if you look at especially the televised and pay-per-view, which he wasn't involved with that much, but Cesaro, you know, even on some of the NXT shows when I was looking up, seemed to come up on the short end of the stick. The other one is one of my all-time favorites, Chris Jericho's at 25, and I love that he came back. I love that he was part of the program, but I can't remember Chris Jericho winning a big match since he's been back. So, I mean, just, again, to justify, like, where does it justify Cesaro at 18 and Jericho at 25, as opposed to 2 main eventers, Aries and Roode, a couple of former world champions with TNA at 12 and 24?
Yeah. A few of that is consistency and activity, I would think, are 2 of the main things that we look at. Now, with Aries and Roode, for example, if you look at the 2 guys, Aries, in fact, is kind of a little experiment. Some of us for the PWI blog, we kind of made our predictions last year about what the top 10 would be for 2013. And I was pretty happy because I nailed, I think, 8 out of 10. So I'm pretty happy for myself. Stu Sachs, the publisher, He predicted Austin Aries at either number 1 or number 2. He thought that Austin Aries, last year, he thought that this would be his year and he'd be the top guy, and he obviously fell out of the top 10. But if we look at that, Jeff Hardy, who came in at number 7, he had a nice, 147 days as TNA World Champion, and then Bully Ray has really kind of been the whole focal point with the Aces and Eights storyline. So those have been the 2 top singles guys, which really accounts for example, Austin Aries kind of dropping down in the ratings. Great in-ring competitor, fantastic wrestler, but spent a lot of his time in tag teams, and even in the tag team ranks, not necessarily putting together a really spectacular run. And then, the whole X Division thing and little things like that, but he was just uneven. He didn't have that great run that he had the previous year. Bobby Roode was even a little bit more uneven. And that's kind of a problem in a sense, not so much with the wrestlers, although it is part of that, but a lot of what TNA does. TNA is always a company that just kind of does even Steven booking and a lot of crazy kind of things where a guy will win one week, lose the next week, the next guy wins, and everyone's kind of, there's more parity in TNA, which makes it difficult for one guy to really stand out. And that's really killed them over the years with having like a champion that's really established himself as a major drawing card, because the champions look like they're in trouble. There's guys who look like they can beat them, and there's never really a dynamic of somebody who's really head and shoulders above the competition, which WWE has had, for example, over the past 10 years with John Cena, in various different times, and CM Punk last year. TNA's never really been able to get behind one guy and just put them up and say, this is our champion, and he's the guy. It's just been kind of, somebody's got the belt for 4 or 5 months, then you put it on somebody else, and that's how it goes. So in any case, that's where guys like that may have dropped down. Cesaro had a great run as U.S. champion. You still have to look at that as the second or third top singles title within WWE. He was a workhorse, did a lot of matches, both in WWE on the SmackDown brand as well as in NXT, and doing some appearances on Raw. He didn't have a great one-loss record, but he did have that kind of long title run in WWE. And again, I think that anyone who's, got a great winning streak going on the Indies would gladly trade that in to have a mid-card title run on in WWE. So given that, and given the fact that he's a great in-ring competitor, I mean, again, we do look, it's not the main criteria, but we do look at talent and in-ring abilities and work rate and other factors like that. Cesaro's got all those. He's proven that many times over the years. So those are things that really kind of helped him have a little bit of a higher rating.
Gotcha. And again, no argument on any of those guys. I mean, I like Cesaro. Like I said, Jericho, one of my favorite guys ever, that I had touched on. I just, again, following the criteria, and I agree with you, Aries and Rude with the tag team stuff. That's that. Just, again, when comparing the two and their spots in each company, I just wanted to touch on that. Again, staying with the WWE kind of versus TNA thing and the people at different levels, again, I'm going to touch on somebody from the TNA side that isn't going to necessarily make me popular, that I'm somewhat pleading this case for him here, but I'm going to throw a bunch of names at you from WWE, and then I'm going to toss this name at you, and you specifically mentioned Bully Ray, who I'm a big fan of, and the whole Aces and Eights angle, which undeniably, like it or not, has consumed a lot of airtime by TNA, and really was their major storyline for most of the period that you're judging at.
Yeah.
So WWE, the names I want to throw at you: 137, Zack Ryder; 140, Heath Slater; 143, Alex Riley; 148, Jinder Mahal; 155, Ted DiBiase; and 159, Drew McIntyre. Now, each of those guys, especially the three-man band guys and Alex Riley, Zack Ryder as well, I mean, really, to my recollection, I mean, maybe I'm missing something on the house shows, but I can't see many of those guys going over anywhere. Now, from TNA, I'm going to hit on it again. I don't know what's going to like this, but Garrett Bischoff, 235. I know he's Eric Bischoff's son. I know everybody doesn't like him because Bischoff and Hogan come in and they ruin everything and blah, blah, blah. whatever with that.
No, it's funny you mentioned Garrett. I got heat last year because I ranked Garrett Bischoff. PWI ranked Garrett at number 400. And people say, oh, it's just because you hate the Bischoffs. You don't like Eric, so you're taking out on their son. And, he's a rookie. Because at that time, Garrett Bischoff, if you remember, was being trained by Hulk Hogan and being pushed, and he won the lockdown match, I think it was, where his pinfall kicked Bischoff out of TNA and the whole thing.
Yeah.
So he was being very heavily pushed. We gave him the 400 spot, and people kind of ripped on us, like, oh, he should be much higher. This year he gets up to 237 or whatever the number was that you had mentioned there. I don't have it right in front of me. But he's been much more active, has a big role with an Aces and Eights, worked guys like Kurt Angle and several others. And it's funny to hear somebody saying, oh, now he's too high. And it's like, wow, no matter what we do with a guy like that, it's tricky.
Right. Well, I'm just saying, fair is fair, and with Bischoff or even someone like Kristen York, who came in and won the contract and got some wins. He was below all those guys, too, a TNA guy at 162. Bischoff, even just working with Angle and being on the winning side of some of the matches there, I know 235 people might say, oh, that's too high for Garrett Bischoff, but I just don't understand how Zack Ryder is 100 spots ahead of Garrett Bischoff when he's got a win. His win over Kurt Angle, I would think, would be more than even close to anything Zack Ryder did.
A win over Bishop, a win over Angle is impressive. It's certainly impressive on paper, but again, the activity. You look at Zack Ryder, and Zack Ryder, realistically, you look at WWE, and WWE is running 4 to 5 shows a week. Zack Ryder's doing all of those. He's working, consistently. The Bischoff, in some cases, is only doing 4 or 5 matches a month. Activity really kind of plays into that. Plus, the thing is, you have Zack Ryder comes out, and you have an arena where you have 12,000 fans, and 8,000 of them are doing woo woo woo, and they're buying his merchandise, and they're into him, and he's getting over. As opposed to Eric Bischoff, who I don't know if you can find Eric Bischoff merchandise. Again, that's not the only thing. It's not marketability per se, but those are the factors that we looked at, and as well as obviously in-ring accomplishment. Again, being a lower to mid-card competitor in WWE against a lower to mid-card competitor in TNA, we give the edge to the WWE guy in most cases, but especially in that case, because when it comes to work rate, I think that Zack Ryder is head and shoulders above Bischoff. So, Bischoff had the one win, and if he can continue to kind of build upon that, then we certainly look at lifting him up higher. But Ryder, former U.S. champion and a prominent guy within WWE throughout the grading period, he really kind of gets that the benefit of it out there.
Sure, I got you. And again, I just, in doing my homework and in looking different things that I, penned down and wanted to ask you about. I appreciate you, analyzing and giving us a fair response on each of these. So now what I'm going to do is, if I'm not mistaken, you said you started with the 597.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Okay. Well, with PWI in 97, yes.
Okay. And you were a part of the team that did the selection for the 500 back as far as then?
I got involved with the 500 around maybe 2002. And mostly at that point I was doing a lot of the writing, just the writing the bios and giving a little bit of feedback. By 2005, I think maybe, I really kind of took a main lead, and certainly after that point, and kind of, doing a lot more of the selection process.
Okay. Well, either way, what I wanted to touch on are some of I had a couple from years gone by here, and again, being that you started in 97, I had thought that you were on there, but your opinion with it is involved and is hands-on and jar with it. Now, let me ask your opinion of a few. I had a question from each of would have been the first 3 years that you were with PWI, even if you weren't involved with the 500, just wanted your take on something, especially given some of the stuff you said, two of them specifically, what you said earlier about your take on the heavyweights and what you thought about them. Now, in 1997, I remember this edition coming out, and again, everyone in wrestling was red hot. The Monday Night Wars, and Nitro and Raw head-to-head, and the NWO, and Stone Cold was just starting
take off and get really hot. Dean Malenko was number 1 in 97. Now, I'm assuming the criteria was the same that year. But, I mean, just in looking through the 1997 500, Malenko, and don't get me wrong, again, great in-ring competitor, like you were just saying about someone like Austin Aries or, you know, Cesaro or whatever, even though Malenko was definitely nowhere near the world heavyweight title at that point. I mean, he was a cruiserweight true and true. I mean, on Nitro, anyone who watched it in 97. Now, he comes up ahead of Steve Austin, his 3, Dallas Cage was on fire, Lex Luger, Big Vince, The Undertaker, you know, that year won the world title at WrestleMania and had it for a few months. Even further down, I mean, Shawn Michaels is down at 18, and I understand he lost his smile there in February and kind of went home or whatever, but he had the title, you know, until February, other than the swap with Sid there quick. And even Bret Hart is down at 20 that year, where he's, you know, he makes a comeback at Survivor Series 96, which would be in the time frame, beats Austin, pretty much beat Austin. And he beat him in that classic match at WrestleMania. I mean, beat Austin pretty much every time he fought him. Yep. What's your take on Malenko as number 1 in one of the biggest boom years of wrestling with all those names, you know, so far down there?
So one of the most controversial picks you've ever had in the 500. I'd say that one and the one 2 years ago where we had the Miz at number 1 are probably the 2 most controversial that we've had. But the thing is with Malenko, that year, you mentioned all those guys, all those legends, Hall of Famers that you went through. Undertaker, Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, even Luger and the guys that he had in WCW at the time. But nobody really stood out from the pack. It was one of these years where everybody was on top. You had a lot of featured guys. Nobody, like I was saying about TNA earlier, where a guy will have the title 4 months later, they'll knock him off, somebody else has it, it's on to the next guy. Nobody really had that terrific 12-month run during the evaluation period. You had these guys who had start and stop title reigns, guys who were inactive, Shawn Michaels went home, this whole thing. But throughout the entire calendar year, you had Dean Malenko. And Dean Malenko, who was responsible for helping to kind of really build the cruiserweight division within WCW, which is one of the big things that really made that company stand out and take the upper edge in the ratings war. I mean, cruiserweight wrestling up until that point really didn't exist, and WCW really kind of helped build it with Dean Malenko as one of the cornerstones of that division. And if you look at the accomplishments he had throughout the year, number 1, you can't argue with his work rate, but number 2, he just had this incredible winning run throughout the year, whereas a lot of the other main event guys just did not have that level of consistency. Again, controversial. I wasn't involved with the committee at the time when they selected him, but I agree with it. I think it was a really kind of gutsy move, but Malenko had an exceptional 12-month run. He ushered in kind of a change in wrestling that has really, you know, helped redefine what pro wrestling was in the 1990s. And I think that his run during that year was more innovative and more influential than anyone that we've had since that point.
All right. Well, I can accept that either way. Again, I would think that would have been, when you said the most controversial and you said the Miz, I was wondering if you were going to say Malenko that year, but obviously there was some that you remember there. All right. Again, I got 2 more questions for you about some past 500s. And again, I'm going to jump, just because of what you just explained about Malenko, I'm going to jump to 1999. Okay. And now you said that was innovative and that style. So this is 2 years later, so that style's there. The cruiserweight style, it's out there. And again, I'm assuming with one of the people that I'm going to name here that at that point in time, unlike now with TNA and Ring of Honor are a little below WWE, it would be tough to say that WWF at the time could have that much pull over WCW or ECW competitor in 1999. I would think they had to be on a pretty similar playing field when it came to mid-card, upper card, everything like that. So what I'm going to get at here is number 4. Again, I know he's a great performer on the 99 500 was Rey Mysterio Jr. Now, he was a cruiserweight, he was this or that. I look at the list, and I see behind him at number 5 is The Rock, who was WWF champion, world champion numerous times.
6, Diamond Dallas Page, who won the WCW World title several times. A couple more spots down, you got The Undertaker, and then Goldberg, and then Taz, who each were their respective companies' world champions as heavyweights. Sting and Kevin Nash come a few numbers down. Now, again, you said Malenko was innovative in '97, and I think Ray is a hell of a worker. But I just listed 6 bona fide world champions that he was ranked ahead of. And not to mention, way down the chart, I believe in the 30s or now that I look at it, I've got it here in front of me. Number 19 was Mick Foley, Mankind, who won his first 2 ever world titles in that big, huge January 4th event where, the Raw that kind of changed the face of the Monday Night Wars. So there's 6 or 7 world champions that are below a cruiserweight that, again, the cruiserweight division's been there for a while. Ray definitely didn't hold any titles to the stature of any of those other guys. How's he ahead of those names?
Oh, I mean, and you're right. There are definitely, in fact, if you look at 99 a little bit further down, I mean, Triple H is down there around 26. And then you've got, get Dr. Wagner Jr. When you look at Lucha, you've got Jushin Liger at 15, and Toshiaki Kawada at 11. And Toshiaki Kawada is probably my favorite wrestler of all time. Kawada, Bob Backlund, and a couple others are definitely on the short list on that. Mysterio, for that point, I can't remember exactly his main runs in '99. I mean, it's quite a while back, but the thing is, again, what we look at is level of competition during that period of time and your won-loss record, as well as your push within your respective promotion. And again, that's a lot of with what you're looking at there is DDP, Goldberg, Kawada. As I kind of go down some of the people after that, Mankind. They had their brief title runs, and they didn't have the overall level of success for a 12-month span. And again, not the 12-month from January to December, but from essentially, for example, this year was June to June. Every year changes a little bit based on our deadlines, but it evaluates within that period of time, and the win-loss records within there. So I can't exactly remember what, like I said, it's been 14 years now, what Mysterio had during that run, but that would be the main thing that we would look at.
Gotcha. Okay, last one that I have for you, then I'm going to send it back over here to Steve, has a couple to finish us off, and
sure.
And then we really appreciate, we have Dan Murphy from Pro Wrestling Illustrated here, talking all things PWI 500 on WGD Weekly with Steve and The Scum. Lastly, I'm going to hit on 98, and again, take your pick here. I know you could choose one or the other, but again, I could be wrong on this, could be wrong on my time frame, but I'm pretty sure that I'm not. Steve Austin 1, Goldberg 2. Goldberg didn't lose till Starrcade.
Right.
So how's Goldberg 2?
Quality of opposition. I mean, right. you look at a lot of people that Goldberg was going up against at that period of time. I mean, he had the world title run, but he also had this period of time where he was just kind of feasting on Jerry Flynn and others, and just doing these little 2-minute matches. These little kind of, he wasn't showing much. Austin was a guy who was wrestling longer matches. He was showing more. He was a more versatile, better pure wrestler. Again, that one goes kind of in-ring ability there. And Goldberg, he was Austin carried the company in 99, really kind of helped his company come ahead in the Monday Night Wars. He really kind of helped WWF take the lead, was getting the mainstream publicity, was capturing the attention in a way that Goldberg wasn't quite. Although Goldberg was certainly a huge star, but if you really look back in retrospect at Austin and Goldberg, Austin was in a league of his own, and he was again wrestling bigger quality names and showing more in the ring than Goldberg really was, with his just kind of jackhammer, spear, entrance, exit, and that was about it. So again, yeah, he didn't have the losses, but he didn't also have as great showings and the quality of opposition that Austin did at that time.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And again, I was just asking, again, I looked at the criteria coming in. I had a few bullet points I was looking at. Personally, yeah. I would agree 100%. Austin is an overall better performer. I mean, looking back, you didn't know how long Goldberg would last, but just at that year, I mean, I'm also a Goldberg fan. I mean, I liked his stuff for what he was, for what he was coming in and steamrolling people, and he was exciting. But yeah, I mean, they did feed him a lot of, guys that he was just running over top of there for a while. So I would agree with that, and I figured that's where you would go with that. I appreciate it. Well, Dan, it's been a pleasure here asking you the things that I wanted to bounce off you. I appreciate you taking each into consideration and responding honestly and giving very valid, pointing out very valid things and answering them. Again, it was a real thrill for me, being a longtime Pro Wrestling Illustrated fan, to have your ear to and your brain to bounce these off. So I hopefully that we can talk again soon. We'd love to have you back on the show. I'm going to send it over to my partner, Steve, was going to wrap up. He had a few questions that he wanted to bounce off you again. Thanks again, though. It's been a pleasure. And Steve, are you ready to hit him with a few?
And thanks so much again for joining us. I got a couple of quick statements, rather. I'd like to go over with you a couple of questions as well. Being able to have a front row seat to that interaction with you and the Scum was some fantastic stuff, and I'm sure our listeners are going to come out of this a lot more educated as to how the PWI 500 comes about. But a couple of things that I wanted to kind of talk about. And if you're a wrestling fan, you're an older wrestling fan, and you kind of fall away from watching it because of everyday life and kids and jobs and and all the things that happen when you're growing up here, and you don't have time to sit in front of the TV every week to watch your favorite shows. When you look at the PWI 500, and something that kind of comes to mind in just a general statement, Dan, is that the larger the plus number, the more this person, and this is kind of more of a rule of thumb for some casual fans or fans that don't know much about the Pro Wrestling Illustrated 500. If you're moving up 75, 80, 100, 200 points or 200 positions from the year prior in the 500, it's a pretty safe assumption that your career's on the rise. And likewise, if that number is a negative number, is on the way down. Would you say that's something that you could maybe as a rule of thumb?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that it's one thing to know is, regardless of who you are in wrestling, your career is going to have those years. You're going to have years where you go up and down. Everybody does, from Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair to Randy Savage and all the way down the line. You're going to have great years and you're going to have down years, because you can never really stay at that top level, other than, say, Hogan in the mid-'80s, but, that sustained level. So some years you're going to jump up, some years you're going to go down, and that's the whole dynamic behind wrestling and what makes the 500 so interesting every year.
It is, absolutely. And something that you guys had mentioned a couple of times when Scum was talking about guy talent from Ring of Honor and TNA versus the WWE workload. How is that rated? Do you use, and again, now getting technical, I guess, is there some sort of a formula that you would use? Because like you said, the average WWE mid-card to upper-card guys working 220, 230 a year, as in days or work days, 220 days a year, whereas the Ring of Honor guys, barring some independent stuff that they're doing on the side just to get, make a little bit of money, their schedule is a lot lighter.
Yep. And there's nothing quite as technical as like a matrix or database. I love matrices and databases. Maybe I should find a way to kind of mathematically figure it all out. But we look at everybody, and where it's really big and really noticeable is the upcoming PWI Female 50 that I'm also involved with, where we rank the top 50 women. You have some of the best women wrestlers in the world in promotions like Shimmer and Shine and WSU and NCW Femme Fatales up in Montreal. But some of those women are only working 15 or 16 matches a year, maybe 20 matches a year. A couple shows a month or so, but they're great. They're incredible wrestlers. But then you have the Funkadactyls, who, if you look at the Funkadactyls, they're working 200 matches a year, or a little bit less than that. If you look at the dark matches and everything else that they're doing, and you find people like Tamina and others in WWE, it might only be a 4-minute match, but they're so active and they're looking. And then you look, okay, you have to kind of look at that. If somebody's able to do, 15 terrific matches during the course of a year, but take, 3 weeks off between every show, you have to kind of factor that in, as opposed to somebody who's on the road touring with the biggest company in the world, and still winning, or competing 4 or 5 times a week. So yeah, we do look at that. Obviously it's a little bit more dramatic of a difference with the women because there are far fewer women-only promotions or promotions that feature women wrestlers. But yeah, we do look at that, and we do look at activity. Again, it's not the only thing. This year what we've really tried to enforce was, and this year was kind of a big thing to do, is have a minimum of, to qualify for the 500 and for inclusion in the 500, to have wrestled at least 20 matches or been active during at least 7 of the 12 months of the evaluation period. And that eliminated people like Triple H and The Rock and The Undertaker and Brock Lesnar. And those are 4 of the top people that WWE's had, say, at WrestleMania. We didn't even consider them because they only did a handful of matches throughout the course of the year. So that is something that we do take into consideration.
Fantastic stuff. Now, moving on to just a couple of names here, and again, we're talking about the process of putting together the 500, and the fact that there's more than one mind trying to put this together and make it a fair list. And a guy like, for example, a guy like Luke Harper. Now, he sits at 126. His star's on the rise on paper, like you said earlier with another thing. If you look at it on paper, it looks really good. He lost 19 spots from last year, from 107 down to 126. However, he's on the cusp of probably being one of the main players on the rise in WWE right now. He's one of my personal favorite guys. Like I said, I love that big bruiser of a guy where the clothesline and the big boots and the power moves look so real. So he's a guy that I really, really like. Not to mention he's from right down the street from where me and the Scum are from in Rochester, New York. So certainly a guy I keep track of. I would want to ask you about a guy like that who only went down 19 spots, yet his star's on the rise. Is he a product of just kind of getting stuck in the middle between some really bigger names and some names that we're going to head down the list a little bit? Or is it something that actually he did to make himself fall 19 spots?
He took a small step backwards so he could make a big step forwards. He was one of the most in-demand people on the independent level. And I've known him for 12 years or so, maybe almost 12, maybe a little bit less, but back when he was wrestling as Brody Lee in the independents, I saw him a lot back in Rochester and in Buffalo and around the area. And the great thing is I remember going to see shows, driving down, and this is something that I try to do and we do as a magazine that often doesn't really get reported on or anything like that. I traveled to independent shows all over the country. I've probably seen shows in about, personally, maybe 18 different states or so, to try to scout talent and see what's going on and just try to keep an eye on things. Plus, obviously, you're looking at matches on YouTube and videos and everything else. I remember going to a match in Pittsburgh, not knowing that Luke Harper, at the time Brody Lee was on, and seeing him in back and talking to him a little bit and seeing him just dominate there and the way the crowd reacted to him. He was the guy who, on the independent level, was really just kicking butt. He had the experience in Shikara and overseas and everything he was doing. He was doing matches against Kevin Nash here and there, and he was doing just great, working a high level of competition on the independent level. He signed a developmental deal. They sit him for a little while. They don't use him for quite as long. They bring him in as part of a tag team. He has a scaled back role, but that's because they're going to try to fast track him to WWE. But if you look at what he'd accomplished, he wasn't wrestling main events on the independent level anymore. He was instead a tag team act in developmental. So he kind of dropped down a little bit. It's not because his skills or skill set diminished. It's because he was used in less of a capacity than he had been the previous year. So like I said, take one small step back and then use that to take a great step forward. I'm sure he'll probably make the top, if not 50, I'd say top 75 this coming year. Knock on wood, and provided he stays healthy, I'm sure he will.
Terrific.
Hey, Dan, I wanted to slide in here quick. When you said earlier, I was wondering when you mentioned the reference about being a Bills fan, you just said you were familiar with a lot of the Rochester, Buffalo area. This is not necessarily PWI 500 rated. Now, are you from that area?
Buffalo, New York, yep.
Okay, all right. So you're familiar, you said, over the last 12 years with the Rochester, Buffalo indie scene then?
I'm sorry, what's that?
So you're familiar with that area's independent scene, I would assume.
Yes.
Okay. Were you familiar with New Millennium Wrestling back in the late 90s?
I was. Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to have a bone to pick with you then, because Steve and I, originally from Oswego, New York, one of my best friends growing up and still to this day, competed in New Millennium and was actually pretty decorated there back in the days where they had the matches there, and I believe it was the old Elks Lodge, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. You been there for those?
I got into, I discovered New Millennium right around the time that they were dying off. In fact, I did a little thing for the magazine where I got in the ring with H.C. Loke and Dunn and Marcos and a couple guys, and they kind of bumped me around a little bit, and we did a little piece in PWI about it. But New Millennium at the time was just kind of falling by the wayside, and Rochester Pro started up and some of the other ones. But, yeah, I was familiar with it. I caught it right at the tail end.
Well, I gotta admit, I was pretty disappointed being his quick rise in New Millennium and some of the titles that he held up there. Were you familiar with a competitor by the name of Gigolo Johnny Walker? Yes, I was. Yeah, well, I gotta admit, I was real disappointed there in '99 when he wasn't on the 500 because he's a lifelong friend, one of my. Still to the day, one of my best friends. Unfortunately, he suffered an injury right when I really felt his star was on the rise because he's been a hell of an athlete his entire life growing up. Anything he touched, he kind of turned to gold, and it was unfortunate there. But any recollections on him or why he wouldn't have been involved there in the 500 that year?
Perfectly honestly, I got involved after that point with the 500, and one of the main things I wanted to do is I thought some of the upstate New York guys, I know this is a little bit local and everything, but the upstate New York guys of Southern Ontario, I thought were underrepresented. And a large part of that is because PWI, the office is based right outside of Philadelphia. Philadelphia is huge on the independent scene, obviously, and location, a lot of the guys got more attention from the editors of PWI because they were closer to Philly. And one of the things I did when I came on was really kind of broaden it out. I've gotten a lot more Canadian talent, upstate New York talent. And if I were making the list a decade ago or a little bit more, Johnny Walker would have definitely done it. I mean, I hope he's doing well. I haven't seen him in a long time, but he was a great wrestler and he had a great look. And, tell him I said hello. I haven't seen him forever.
I certainly will. I know he'll be listening to the show, and I know he'll appreciate that. The senior writer of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, if he would have had his way, would have seen Johnny on the 500 that year. Because personally, I know when I got the magazine, I tore into it. I used to go up with him sometimes when he trained up there in Rochester. And he's doing great. He's married, a couple of children, and has really done well for himself. He's a great guy, and I'll be sure and pass on your hello, Dan. That's real.
Good for him. I remember the Candyman out there, and Chip Stetson, and obviously Hellcat, and some of the other guys who were there at the time. So that's fantastic. There's a lot of talent there.
Johnny used to team with the Hellcat. A funny story. A group of us used to always go up in support of him there when we did the New Millennium tapings. And you mentioned the Candyman, another good friend of mine that Steve's familiar with. We had some words when we were giving it to some of the performers in the crowd, and the Candyman took offense to one of my friends getting on him. So I think the Candyman will probably remember the Oswego, New York crew that used to go up and cheer on the Gigolo up there. So I'll pass on the well wishes for sure.
Sounds good. Cool.
All right. Good. That's great stuff. And now keep in mind, Dan, Johnny Walker's one of the few guys I can remember in like 9th and 10th grade in high school at the movie theater. We're all camped out there waiting to go in, and he was doing Great Muta's move where he did the somersaults into the elbow into the corner. He was doing that on the street in 10th grade in the early 90s, just to kind of let you know. He was a great guy, and I'm glad we had a chance to get him into our show. I wanted to ask about, and again, now we have fans from all over the world tuning into our show, so let's take a second to talk about a couple of the folks in the top 10 and the top 20 here that are based in Japan. We got Hiroshi Tanahashi, Kazuchika Okada, am I right there?
Okada, yep.
Suwama and Kente, all guys, two of the latter actually hold titles, I believe, at this moment, All Japan. It looks like a Pro Wrestling Noah. So tell us a little bit about who they are and why they made the top 20.
Well, again, it's a lot of the championship. It's a lot of the title success. Right now, I think that the best rivalry in pro wrestling is in New Japan Pro Wrestling, and it's really because you got Tanahashi and Okada, and these guys are this generation's in the 80s, you had Flair and Steamboat. And the 90s and early 2000s, you had basically, say, Christopher Daniels and AJ Styles. And now you've got these guys. These guys are capable of just really kind of taking each other to the next level. And Okada and Tanahashi are just the best two that Japan has to offer right now. And right now, we gave Okada has the IWGP title. We gave Tanahashi the slight. In fact, this is the first time we've ever done it. Had two of our top five based in Japan, and that's really because they've just been on top and really kind of redefining the success in Japan with their individual matches. The thing that's tough about Japan, though, is they tend to do a lot of trios and tag matches and things like that, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to really kind of make guys stand out because there's a lot of tag matches where, your top guy will lose a tag team match, but then later on will win a singles match, and it's kind of, again, a little bit uneven and difficult to get guys on top. But Tanahashi, we gave number 3 to, Okada at number 5, two of the New Japan talents in the top 5, and I think Sawama, and I forgot the other one that you had mentioned. But again, it's the success that they've had, with the Triple Crown title and All Japan and Noah.
That's some fantastic stuff. And like I said, I just wanted to make sure that not, believe it or not, maybe it's 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20, but there are purists, so to speak, out there that will only watch just a good technical wrestling match and really don't care for the current product in the U.S. market today. So we wanted to make sure that every fan that listens to our show at least gets a little something out of it. So we really appreciate it, Dan. Now, I got a couple of lighthearted questions here for you. And we look at number 16, Kane, which I'm one of my favorite guys of all time now. And the database I'm looking at here has the nationality next to it in a little insignia of a flag. So, John Cena from the U.S. and Sheamus there, the Irish flag. Now, Kane has a flag, and it's so small I can't quite see it. Is that the flag to parts unknown?
Now, what's that? Are you seeing that on the International Wrestling Database?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't know what that may be. That could be, maybe it's the flag of, I don't know, wherever Dr. Isaac Yankem holds his dental degree. So maybe somewhere in Barbados, I don't know.
But I think it's actually Spain.
I was going to say, go ahead, Steve.
I'm zooming in here, and I believe just from wrestling, thinking about it from the past, I think he does have Spanish origins, but still, I'm zoomed in on this to the nth degree till it's blurry, and I can't figure out for the life of me what it is. So I'm just going to pretend it's either parts unknown. It's red and black, so it's either parts unknown or the inner level of hell.
Yeah, it's one of the devil's favorite demons. Hey, it's somewhere in hell. 7th circle.
Yeah, Steve, that's what I was going to say. I was going to pop in there and say I'm pretty sure that flag is Hell's official flag. That's what I'm pretty sure of.
Well, Dan, excuse me, while I got you on the line here, while we have you on the line, why don't we take a second to talk about what you find to be the most interesting? Tell us your favorite PWI 500, and more importantly, the one thing you could take away from Pro Wrestling Illustrated from day one are just the fantastic covers of the magazine. I'm looking at the magazine covers now, and I see this one, and Mil Mascaris, the one with Mil Mascaris, I remember that from being a kid. The one with Magnum TA in the hospital bed.
Oh, my God.
God, there's a million of them, man. They bring back all these great memories from being a kid growing up watching wrestling. What's your favorite cover, and what's your favorite PWI 500?
Wow. Favorite cover. Off the top of my head, here's a few that I'll throw out there just off the top of my head. The Magnum TA with the teardrop in his eye, or with Nikita with the teardrop in his eye saying, "I weep for Magnum TA" after the car accident. That was a powerful one. There was one that I think it was either Victory Sports or Sports Review Wrestling, where they kind of photoshopped Kamala, who is a great guy. I love Kamala.
Me too.
where they put Hulk Hogan's head on the end of a spear. If you remember that one.
I knew that's what you were going to say when you said Kamala. I love
that.
That's
one of my all-time favorite covers right there. I think there was a cover with the Von Erichs. I was a huge fan of the Von Erichs as a kid. I still am. an incredible family, incredible history. It was a little bit weird, but with I think it was Chris, with the kid who will lead them into the 90s or whatever the case was, and obviously that didn't quite happen. But having that cover story with the entire Von Erich family on the front, cover was awesome. And then there was a PWI with Wendy Richter, and I think that the piece was, is she more popular than Hulk Hogan? And I think at the time that she might have been, or at least damn close. And I think that it really kind of showed, a potential popularity of women's wrestling and what could have been. And it just took 30 years or so, or a little bit more, for it to actually be realized. But those are a few of the iconic ones I remember and can think of right off the top of my head. But that's just one of the great things with PWI is the covers, the photography. The photography is top notch, and maybe I'm kind of old school or a purist. I'm in the process of moving right now. I'm moving from one house to another, and I have maybe 1,000 old wrestling magazines. And it would be so easy just to throw them all out because I'm moving and they're so heavy and they take up space. But I can't part with them, because even though they're beaten up and they're in different stages of disarray and earmarked or dog-eared or whatever, I still, as almost 40 years old, enjoy picking them up and flipping through those and looking at the artwork and the stories and the headlines and the memories that come back from those. And I think that having something like PWI through all those years and being able to have a tactile thing that you can touch really kind of brings you back to your roots as a wrestling fan and as a kid. And I think it's a long-lasting bond that you can form with the magazine.
Absolutely.
Sure. I would agree. A lot of those covers, like I said, I was a subscriber and used to just couldn't wait for it to come in the mail. A couple of things I always wondered, maybe you can shed some light on. I know, you kind of, PWI back in the day kind of went along with storyline. One of my favorite covers, one of my favorites of all time. He eventually, went on to become the $1 Million Man. But when I first got in, I always remembered one where Ted DiBiase was on the cover with the black glove. And
yeah.
I believe the headline, I could be wrong on this was a long time ago, was "The Carnage Continues, the NWA's plan to ban Ted DiBiase." And I remember seeing that and thinking, now, was that them? I wonder, was that them working with the magazine, or was that, was that legitimate, like along with storyline? And another one that maybe you could shed some light on, there was one with Dusty Rhodes on it where it said, "Win a pair of Dusty's boots."
Yeah.
Do you remember? Yeah. Did they really give away Dusty's boots there?
Oh, yeah. We did a whole giveaway that year. We did a pair of Dusty's boots. I was a fan at the time. I entered the drawing to win Magnum TA's the tights that he won, or the trunks he wore against Tully. Yeah. Yeah, those were good. A lock of Ric Flair's hair, the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I always wondered, like, are these people that want, is that real? Am I sending away, am I signing off and sending away for Dusty's boots for nothing? But
no, it was 100% legit. And in fact, I remember my dad kind of looking at me saying, "So let me get this straight. I'm 12 or 10 or whatever it was. Got into a contest to win another man's sweaty underwear." I'm like, no, he wore these in the I Quit match. This is history. Like, you're disappointing me, son.
Guys, I want to interrupt you here real quick just because I have it in front of me at this point. June of 1984, the cover price was $1.75. Pro Wrestling Illustrated, "The Carnage Continues, why the NWA is afraid to stop Ted DiBiase."
Okay, that's the one I'm thinking. And it's him with the glove, and it's a close-up of the face.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Sure, yeah, I remember that. Funny, I was close, maybe not banned, but afraid to stop. I'm close enough. But another one me and Steve have always laughed about, a lot of our friends laughed about, it wasn't a cover, but I think it was one of the quarterly, the wrestling, in the 83 or 84 or something like that. We've always laughed about the one that, I think it was 83 or 84, they did a pictorial in there, a Mr. Wrestling 2, and it was him, like, doing the breaststroke and barbecuing and, like, his senior portrait from high school and everyone, he's got the mask on.
Yep.
You remember that one?
I do remember that one, yep.
Do you have that in your archives still? Do you have the pictures of that?
We do. We have all those old pictures. They're not up online. There's nothing like that, but it's kind of weird because in the office there's an entire room where it's all, old prints, old slides, old everything else, and man, it's a treasure trove for any wrestling fan. It's the coolest thing in the world because we still have all of those.
We would love to get a graphic of Wrestling 2 doing the breaststroke to use on our site if all possible. If that could be arranged, because that edition, that actual article has lived famously amongst our friends since the mid to early 80s.
I'll see what I can do.
There's one of Wrestling 1, too, that we found not too long ago, of Tim Woods, Mr. Wrestling, with sitting on a huge, Harley touring bike, shooting a gun, and, doing, motocross jumps on a dirt bike, all with a wrestling mask on. So fabulous stuff. And I got another cover up in front of it, and here, this is probably the first cover I vaguely remember, and I certainly saw it in a pile at the newsstand, not when it immediately came out, but this is May of 1982. The spoilers boast, I'll reveal Wrestling 2's ugly face, with a great photo of him putting the claw hold on, too, on the cover. Some fantastic stuff here.
Yep, absolutely.
Love it. That is some good stuff, man. I'm going back through and looking at all these, and there's the one of the Road Warriors that March of 84, that's about as popular a cover as you'll find with them with those big tag straps on.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's the one where they did the really nice lighting and they shot them a little bit lower than waist, so they just look big and imposing, and with the shadows and everything, with the face paint, it was terrific.
Yes. Yeah, that's a fantastic show. Now, Scum, before we head out here, is there anything more that you wanted to ask our guest today?
No, this has been a treat. I mean, just to not only to discuss the 500, but to go back and think about some of those covers with, Dan, who's there with PWI now, kind of reliving it with us. It's been fantastic. Again, I just want to thank him a lot. Thank Stu Sachs, your publisher, for kind of getting me in touch with you and allowing us to, relive this year's 500 and, some of the memories of Pro Wrestling Illustrated past. And like I said, we would certainly welcome and more than welcome you to come back anytime and join us. It's been great. And just wanted to say thanks. That's all.
Hey, thanks for having me. And Scum, based on some of the things that we were saying when you were asking about how certain guys were ranked, I wanted to bring this up, too, before I left. Is we debate this, the team of writers debates placements, and it's kind of we'll sit there and we'll debate back and forth between 7 or 8 people, who should be number 7, who should be number 8, and there's always somebody, it's the kind of compromise. There's always people who walk away like, oh, that guy's ranked too high or too low or whatever. So even among ourselves, we have trouble kind of finding consensus. And that's part of the beauty of the 500 is that there's room for debate and discussion on it. But what we try to do is try to objectively, as much as possible, look at all of the information, and that's where the rankings kind of come from. But in every year, in every process, it's never unanimous as we go all the way through. So there's always, even within the inner sanctum of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, debate about placements within the 500.
I can imagine when you get 8 experts in there and everyone has their own opinion. I could see where that could be a lengthy meeting to sit down and hash that thing out. I'm sure it's somewhat fun to arrive at your final decisions, but I can imagine at times it could be tedious trying to get your point across and sell what you're trying to say to each other.
I'm going to give you a pass, Dan, on Alberto Del Rio based off of what you told me. I'm assuming it's work rate, and that's the reason why he's in the top 300. Oh, boy, I'll tell you what, this is the fan in me talking here. It's just that's Alberto Del Rio is Spanish for I'm going to the bathroom. When he comes out on TV, I'm getting up, I'm getting something to drink, and I'm going to take a quick trip to the water closet while he does his thing, and again, no, it's a matter of flavor, and I can only imagine it's work rate. He's always on television. He generally wins, and I think, Scum, at one point, you or I in a conversation said that I'm willing to bet a couple of dollars here that he's got some nasty pictures of Vince McMahon, and Vince doesn't want him to get out, so he gives him a belt and all the money in the world to just keep him quiet. So We'll give you a pass on that one, I guess.
No, all right. I'll take the pass.
Dan Murphy, senior writer of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, joining us here at WGD Weekly. We want to thank him once again. If there's anything else you want to get in, Dan, while you're here, any other ventures that you're working on? I know you mentioned the Female 50. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before you parted ways with us tonight?
That's the big one. The PWI Female 50 will be the next issue I have coming out. And in the meantime, I encourage all the fans to check out the website, pwi-online.com. You can check out everything that we got going on, the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame write-ups the list of people that we've focused on, and the news that we have, a variety of different links that are on that website, our blog. And you always have the opportunity to now download a digital edition of the magazine. So you can get that. You can purchase that online as well. So if you just prefer looking at things digitally and not having a magazine to kind of tote around with you, that's another option that's available at the website.
Fantastic stuff. You heard it, folks. PWI-online.com. Check it out. I have it as bookmarked on my browser. I know I use that for my daily lookup to see what's going on around the world of professional wrestling. We wish you guys would do the same. Once again, Dan Murphy, senior writer of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Thanks again for joining us, man. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Take care, guys.
That was something special.
Yeah, sure was. I mean, we've discussed before, not only when you were talking the covers and bringing up the Wrestling 2 pictorial there, and it's a trip down memory lane there to go back to your childhood and think of getting that magazine, digging into it, and I actually. Just in my introduction from, where we grew up in central New York, you didn't necessarily get to see a lot of the guys, the older guys, the Abdullahs, the Brodies, the guys that were in world class, or the guys down in the Mid-South, the JYD and the, Hacksaw Duggins. And then, you'd read about them for years, and you saw the pictures in PWI and Inside Wrestling and The Wrestler. And then, when they did pop up on WWF TV, you were so excited. This guy I remember one week watching Championship Wrestling, the old Saturday morning WWF TV show, and they'd announce who's on next week. And one day they said King Kong Bundy. And it was like, wow, King Kong Bundy, because you'd seen him so much, and, you were just in the pictures, and you just kind of let your imagination run wild when you'd read about these wild men, in PWI. So it was a real treat. I know it was a treat for you too, Steve. Also real cool to hear Dan Murphy, senior writer of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, give props that Gigolo Johnny Walker would have been sitting on the 500 in 99 had he had his say, because I can tell you what, hey, this isn't just being a friend of his, and Johnny, if you're listening, I used to say it to you at the time when we would go to all the matches, not just me saying it, man, you certainly, it's a shame that there was an injury there, because that was a star that I think could have maybe soared to some heights, and on a personal level, I know you know Johnny as well, Steve. It would have been great to see that, because he's a great guy and a great friend, and cool to hear him get some props from the senior writer of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, right?
Oh, absolutely, man. And Johnny had it too. He was a big guy. He was jacked up. And I'll tell you what, and I know we know him, so maybe it's skewed a little bit, but I really don't think it is. But that guy had charisma. Johnny, he was a guy that could keep a room together. And also, a small-known fact, I think, Scum, you filled me in on this, the only other guy I know other than myself to out at a bar take a bump and come up bleeding.
Back in the days of, for our Central New York listeners, back in the days of Charlie's, I think it was Johnny that let someone have it with a Singapore cane in the bar room once. Maybe I'm mistaken on that, but pretty sure he was swinging one before in the bar room. And he was just a hell of a talent, and he's a great friend of mine. And I couldn't resist when Dan was saying that he was a Rochester, Buffalo indie guy. And at 12 years, I did the math quick, and I just had to bring that up, because I remember when that year's tally came out, thinking someone didn't see him, because he was damn good, and I know he was passionate about it. And, it was cool to hear someone at that level in the profession, a wrestling journalist, to not only remember him being there, but also to, give him his props as he was a great talent. And, hey, I mean, I even remember back in the days a little bit before then, the UWA, a little bit local, where he cut his teeth, and it was the All-Americans with another friend of ours, Chaz, as his tag team partner. And we all know that Chaz, if nothing else, he used to do it for the kids. So,
I got a Chaz story for you, and this is something, again, now you Oswego people, you people from upstate New York will appreciate this. It's a pretty wild night out. It's the middle of summer. Myself and a couple of associates of mine were hanging out at my house, and I lived on the main street in town and above another store, and I had a nice big bay window. I look out, and now we're up. We hit the bars and came home a little bit early this night, and it was probably about 1:30 in the morning, and I hear this loud, like, metallic, like, creaking sound. I'm like, what is that? So we all get up, we look out the window, and there's Chaz with a stop sign in his hand. No, it wasn't a stop sign. It was a no parking sign. Like, back and forth, once, twice, 3 times out of the ground. The man pulled a no parking sign out of the sidewalk and then just started walking up the street with it. I don't quite know what happened to that thing, but I can only imagine.
Yeah, well, back in those days, the Gigolo went as JP, one half of the All-Americans. And like I said, Chaz, he always was sure to let everyone know he was doing it for the kids. It was unfortunate in them UWA days, the old analogy that everyone puts on Kevin Nash from WCW, the Booker saddle of himself with the strap. Old Bombshell Billy with the abuse of power always seemed to be sporting the heavyweight gold when the true workers were down in the red, white, and blue up there. So go there. We had a great show here tonight with the PWI 500. How about some of your favorite parts of the conversation with Dan Murphy there, Steve?
Well, it was really interesting to hear how that whole thing was broken down because, initially, and I think we all do this, is when we first opened the PWI 500, if you even read this thing, and if you don't, I implore you to do it because, if anything, it'll get your wrestling IQ up a couple of points while you're looking through it. But, the initial reaction is always, oh, my God, why is this guy there? Oh, man, what the fuck? Daniel Bryan is not in the top 10? Are you kidding me? Because that's initially the 2 things that stuck out to me, the 3 things, really, were 2 Japanese guys I've never heard of, Alberto Del Rio at number 8, and Daniel Bryan not in the top 10. So, that initial gut, knee-jerk reaction, you're like, you got to be kidding me. But having listened to how this process goes through and the detail and the time and the thought that not only he but the rest of the staff at PWI put in to make this thing what it is, it's something pretty spectacular. So, I didn't ask him any questions about Daniel Bryan. I thought it would be sufficient as to what he said, and he actually mentioned him, by name, so we're going to let that one go. We had so many questions, and I know that we could probably spend another 3 or 4 hours talking with him about this, but that was what initially came to my mind, Scum. But I'll tell you, as we're talking about some local celebrities that we all know here that were not on the 500, check it out this year, man, 2013, number 500, Lucifer Lords is Mr. Irrelevant, so to speak, in the PWI 500. He's the last guy, kind of like the NFL draft. If you are too big of a wrestling geek to know what Mr. Irrelevant is, like, get out of your basement and watch the NFL draft. It's the last guy picked. So I'm not saying Lucifer Lords is irrelevant, so don't leave me some sort of comic book guy-esque voice. Why did you pick on Lucifer Lords? I did not. I'm just saying he's the last guy on the list. Now, I looked up his one-loss record. There's nothing there. I looked up notable feuds of note, nothing there. Like, I went through all the PR stuff for Lucifer Lords number 500, not a thing. So what I'm saying here, folks, is there's really no evidence to say that Lucifer Lords at 500 did anything more to get himself over this year than the Scum did. So why isn't the Scum in the top 500?
Valid point. Maybe a lot of these guys making their comebacks, start their petitions online. Get Jake the Snake in the Royal Rumble 2014. Get this guy here. Maybe we'll look to get the Scum in the PWI 500 next year. See, who knows? WrestleCade, maybe somebody, thinks they got a little bit of a sharp tongue down there in Winston-Salem. Maybe the Scum will have to get in and show them exactly what the buzz is about, exactly why he is the latest sensation sweeping the wrestling radio nation.
Oh, brother. Well, they ought to give you about $490 or $491 and give me $500 just for dealing with you. So I can see $491, the scum, at number 500, just Steve.
Yeah, well, you know, Steve, you do put up with a lot, so maybe you ought to get a bump a little higher than 500 for having to deal with this guy. But I appreciate you bearing with me. You know, you're a heck of a guy, my friend.
You know, as they always say, as the good old JR said, he's a damn good man.
That's right. That's right.
Well, this is going to bring us to the end of our, and again, now, this is a special weekly edition. This isn't our weekly edition. This is a special edition of WGD Weekly with Steve and The Scum, the PWI 500 edition. We are super stoked. We're so glad you guys were able to listen to it tonight. We're marking out like little kids, and I never use that word, but I actually am. Going through all these old PWIs and the 500s and talking to Dan Murphy, senior writer at PWI. Fantastic stuff. We hope he comes back on the show and maybe even gets Stu Stacks and maybe even that old wily veteran singer, the crooner, Bill Apter. Maybe we'll see him down the road sometime soon. What do you say, Scum?
Yeah. Bill Apter, a great guy, you know, one of being by day somewhat of a journalist and outside of the show. Always have really liked this stuff. You know, grew up reading Bill Apter stuff and just watching as he moved along with the times, let's say, and OneWrestling.com, that great site that he's got over there. You know, Bill is, you know, someone who certainly whose work I have been influenced by and read a lot. And, yeah, it would be an honor. I know he doesn't have anything per se to do with Pro Wrestling Illustrated these days, but again, I mean, a lot of people, you've heard the term after mags, you know, back in the 80s when, in early 90s, like Dan was saying, when those magazines were maybe at their height of popularity. You know, now I think they probably do a lot more with the digital edition and everything, but Bill Apter is certainly, if not the most legendary figure in wrestling journalism as far as print journalism. No one else is really popping into my mind. It'd be an absolute honor to have Bill on the show. And, you know, if we talk about irons in the fire, let's not tip our cap too far, but Steve, that iron might already be in the fire without getting any further along with that. So we may have the chance again to walk down memory lane with some of our friends from Pro Wrestling Illustrated, past, present, and, you know, into the future. So, you know, we'll keep you posted on that, and maybe we can bring you Mr. Apter here at some point.
Boy, I know that you and I both would be pretty excited about that, and maybe we'll challenge him to a karaoke contest.
Yeah. I know our listeners probably aren't too familiar with that, but you know that you are. I mean, I know there's many a time that you've stood behind the man with the ready to poke someone's Adam's apple out in his defense with the end of your base. But the Scum has a unique talent that not many know about, and that he is quite the singer himself, quite the entertainer, has, you know, sold out many big soccer stadiums over in Peru, in between his inland performances in America. You know, a real big star overseas. Not so much here. You know, he always kind of found himself in some type of controversy, you know, coining the phrase that you and I both know many a time as he was carried out of a venue that he will, quote, call the cops. So, you know, we'll see. We'll see if that opportunity arises. We'll see if Apter is up for the challenge to take on the singing sensation that is the Scum.
Unbelievable. Oh, boy, we're going to move on, folks. We want to thank you once again for tuning in to WGD Weekly Special Edition, mind you, of the PWI 500. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name is Steve on behalf of the Scum. We're going to see you very soon. Scum, is there anything else you wanted to add to our show?
No. Thanks to, again, thanks to Stu Sachs, the longtime publisher over at Pro Wrestling Illustrated, for getting us on board with the PWI. It's an honor to be affiliated in any way with them. We hope to keep that relationship there in the future. We maybe could visit with Dan on some of their, you know, major issues. I know they have 3, 4, maybe 5 of them a year. Maybe we could do the same thing with the 500 with some of those other ones. Thanks again to Dan and all the people in Kappa Publishing and Pro Wrestling Illustrated. It's a real thrill, and it's an honor to be associated on our broadcast with such a hallowed name in wrestling journalism. It's really a thrill and somewhat mind-boggling to me, but I know you feel the same way. So thanks to the guys at PWI. Hop over to PWI.com. Pick up the digital edition. Again, we support them in any way that we possibly can. And just a heartfelt thanks. It was really fun to go down memory lane and relive some of those old days, and to hear, the stuff about the 500. That's all I got, Steve. Just a really heartfelt thank you. It was fun to, kind of be a kid again and think about some of those old times.
Absolutely, Scum. You said it best. Folks, we're going to see you very soon. We got a lot of special guests coming up, a lot of irons in the fire. Join us once again every Sunday night for WGD Weekly with Steve and The Scum. Until next Sunday, on behalf of The Scum, my name is Steve, and we'll see you at the matches.